the country does not want this war. If he continues to go forward, he's going to pay a very high political price. And so will his party, especially with independents who continue to sour on him. They're sour on the Democrats too, but the Democrats aren't continuing this war. He is.
Was also higher in districts Joe Biden carried in terms of a comparison to the districts that Donald Trump carried back then. So in the Biden districts, you had 92%. That's how many people turned out for the special election in places that Biden had turned blue. Versus Trump, 88% is the share of voters that went to the ballot in districts that Trump had turned red. So again, that was then. That was the numbers then. The backdrop then. What about now? Our friend Paul Rieckhoff is here for his weekly appearance with us ahead of the president. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you.
Of course, of the Independent Americans podcast. And back in Georgia, again, for Republicans, you hope to avoid a repeat of that. What do you expect from the president today? The message is supposed to be about Trump accounts and the economy. We'll see.
I think it's going to be bombs away. That's what Trump's done almost every time he's gone into a state. The question is, how hard will he come after Ossoff, who is kind of viewed as an upstart, kind of echoes a bit of a Kennedy. He's only, late 30s, I think. He's been rumored as a presidential candidate. He's been taking on Trump aggressively. I think Ossoff would like to run against Trump. But as always, independents here are going to be key. In Georgia, I think it's about 28%, about 2 million voters. There are independent and unaffiliated, and they're going to turn the tide here.
Trump, his favorability numbers in Georgia were at 42. Ossoff, the sitting senator now, after that runoff in 21 and now running for re-election, is at 58% in terms of his favorability. All these attacks, all this talk of elections, it may have even helped Ossoff to push that number even higher. Don't you think in recent weeks?
I think it has. Trump is unpopular, but so is the Democratic brand. And I think what Ossoff has to do here is run against Trump, run against the Democrats, run against the establishment, really try to position him as the populist, as the true defender of Georgia against everyone. If he can do that, and especially focus on the economy, focus on gas prices, and focus on the Iran war, where there are a lot of military bases in Georgia. I served in Georgia. There's a lot of military retirees in Georgia.
But focus in what way on the war?
But the cost, right? And the war is very, very unpopular, more and more unpopular by the day, even more so today after 4 service members were returned to Dover. Americans don't like this war. And if Ossoff can make it about Trump and make it about the war and make it about the economy, I think he's going to do well.
Now, from the president's point of view and the Republicans' point of view, I would argue, I've said this before on the show, that some of these ideas, like these Trump accounts, could be popular and populist and could be something that would help Republicans and help the president make his argument. To me, the issue is many times when he has an event about that, it quickly gets derailed and he spends a minute or two on it and then he's talking about something else.
Yeah.
It's elections or whatever the case.
It's stuff like that got him elected.
Right.
But he said he was going to focus on the economy. He said he was going to make life more affordable. But the tariffs are also very unpopular. Gas prices are very unpopular. These accounts for kids can be popular, but can they overwhelm people's focus on housing prices and on gas prices and on food prices? I don't think they can. It's still kind of a complicated thing to understand. It's going to take some marketing. He's going to have to sell the country on it. And meanwhile, we're hearing about casualties from the Middle East almost every hour.
What about this war? And, as you said, the president earlier today was at Dover for the 4 service members, honoring them, the dignified transfer of remains coming back from Iran. Okay. The war itself, if anything, seems to be picking up. It's 11 straight nights, I think, of strikes. So the president seems like he has a decision to make. It's interesting. I had some conversations on the show about this yesterday. Peter Mansour's retired colonel was on. And I said that to him and he said, no, I don't think so. I think it's just going to kind of drag on like this. He thinks we'll still be talking about this war in a year. A lot of Republicans would say, boy, I didn't even think we'd be talking about it in November. Where do you sit on that?
That's what's happened last time. And I think that's why this is so unpopular. People remember Vietnam. They remember Iraq. They remember Afghanistan. And this is less popular than all of them. It started out less popular. Iraq and Afghanistan started out more popular and degraded over time. This is starting out at a very low level. And that's across the board, including with the Republican base. So it's very, very unpopular. Trump, I think, wants an off-ramp, but this is almost a definition of a quagmire now.
What'd you make? You think it's basically a quagmire?
I do, especially because it's expanded expanded beyond the region. The Strait of Hormuz is not open. He says he wants to take out the new capacity. He's been unable to do that. So he's really put himself into a very tough position here. And the longer it goes on, the more it's going to hurt him politically, and the more it's definitely going to hurt Republicans down ballot, like the Senate candidate in Georgia.
I'm sure you have some thoughts on Secretary Hegseth yesterday, General Kane. Let me play a quick clip, a montage of that hearing, which we covered in real time throughout almost the entire show yesterday, since it doesn't look like the president's going to speak, at least in the next minute or two. So this was part of what we covered yesterday. Then we'll talk about it. Listen.
Without these funds, we face critical shortfalls that threaten our ability to also simply pay our service members, rapidly replenish equipment and munitions, and sustain vital operations without disruption. And I appreciate as much as anybody winning a war, but I sit in front of a committee that wants to talk about winning a war that's been going on for 4 years and talks about strategic defeat of a conflict that's been going on for 4 months to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. But the amount of damage that we've done to them over the course of these series of operations has put them in the worst place they've ever been.
Your kind of thoughts on it was quite a day. Again, we covered the whole thing pretty much. Your thoughts on where we are and what was said.
This is what happens when you go to war without popular support and without Congress. Hegseth and Trump went to war without the support of Congress, without a declaration of war, without the funding for the war. Now the war has gotten to be more protracted, and Hegseth is going back with hat in hand to say, I need more money. Well, failing to plan is planning to fail, and they failed to plan for what they would need for this point. Now it's gone on, and Hegseth is back there in a very different kind of position. His shoulders are lower. He's a lot more confrontational. But the truth is, he should have gone to Congress first. And that's why the Constitution is written the way it is, where you need a declaration of war, you need congressional support, and you need the money. And there's no assurance that even if he gets this $70 billion, they won't be back again in a couple of months. So I think Congress has had it. They're exasperated with him and with the human cost of war and the financial cost.
But do you expect them to do anything about it?
I think Congress will vote no on the funding. I think we saw more Republicans starting to break here. They didn't have an opportunity to vote no on the war, but they do have an opportunity to vote no on supplemental funding. And you saw in the War Powers Act, he lost a couple of Republicans. It was a 50-50 vote, and I think it's going that way more and more by the day.
Well, the House is supposed to start a series of votes including on that funding, I believe, or on the defense policy bill this hour.
Yeah, and they didn't. I always talk about this. They talked a lot about the financial cost. They did not talk about the human cost. And there's some reporting this week from the New York Times that says that the Pentagon hasn't been forthcoming with the number of wounded. That's a problem.
Right.
We need to talk about the human cost. You've shown them on the screen. 4 of them are coming home today. One here in New York, who's a sergeant who grew up in Queens. Americans care about their own. They care about their sons and daughters. And if you don't address that fact and bodies continue to come home in flag-draped coffins, Americans are not going to like it.
Yeah, it wasn't only the 4 that came home today or the others that have been killed in action, but all the hundreds that have been injured. That's what we didn't seem to have a lot of transparency on.
You also didn't hear, and you haven't heard from the Veterans Affairs Secretary. Strangely, yesterday, he was next to the Agriculture Secretary. They had this weird joint.
Right. There was some farm aid and things like that.
She's talking about farm aid and meat packing, which I think did a disservice to this very important conversation about this protracted war. But we haven't heard from the VA Secretary. What does he need? He's going to have a whole new generation of veterans coming home with a whole new kind of injuries. And if he needs funding, if he needs support, if he needs Congress, we need to hear from him now, not a couple years from now.
To circle back on the politics, and again, the president will speak supposedly about the economy, but it could be about literally anything. We've seen these events before. If you're a Republican looking at this, I wonder what assumptions you were making that now you have to change. In terms of timeline for the war, for example, I'm sure most Republicans said, well, it looks like the president kind of wants to get out of this. All right, we'll put this behind us. It wasn't a popular war, but we can go into the midterm elections in November talking about Trump accounts or economic issues. But now it looks very much like the war might be a thing.
And it should be. I mean, there's nothing more serious than the lives of our sons and daughters. There's nothing more serious than stability in the Middle East, oil prices, gas. I mean, it's all wrapped up into this giant, what I've called sucking chest wound that's pulling in our politics and our economy and 40% of our military. So it's going to be unavoidable. Republicans want to talk about immigration. They want to talk about housing prices. They want to talk about bread and butter, kitchen table issues. But the war keeps coming forward, and Trump doesn't seem to want to end it. He's now threatening to accelerate it and increase and expand the war. And that's bad news for Republicans in Georgia and nationwide.
Stand by, Paul. I want to go to Marietta now. Ahead of this event, our White House correspondent Libby Dean is traveling today with the president and joins us there. It looks like they're just about to start. So set us up for what we expect to see from the president moments from now, Libby.
Feels and sounds like a Trump rally here in Marietta, Georgia, Connell. But we did get off to a very somber start today. I am traveling with the president aboard Air Force One, and we went to Dover Air Force Base, where we saw the dignified transfer of the 4 U.S. soldiers who were killed in the conflict with Iran. To give some context to our viewers, it was absolutely heartbreaking to hear the family members bawling, crying as those transfer cases came out of the C-17 this morning. So a very somber start, and Iran's certainly a focus, but the president is here to talk about affordability and the economy. That's what this is billed to be about. And this is going to be the first time that we've heard from President Trump since that dignified transfer. And aboard Air Force One with us was the family members of one of the U.S. soldiers that was killed in Iran in that attack on Jordan. And I actually asked President Trump before we got on Air Force One this morning about any kind of update into that investigation, given we don't know how those U.S. soldiers were killed in Jordan, despite a Wall Street Journal report that Iran was targeting barracks inside Jordan. The president didn't confirm that report or provide any more information, only vowed that Iran will pay a big price for killing U.S. soldiers. And we also know the president is threatening to expand this conflict with Iran, posting this morning that for every ship that Iran hits in the Strait of Hormuz, he will take out a bridge or a power plant. So certainly a lot on tap here for the president. Of course, Republicans, some of them are hoping the president stays on message here as the midterm elections near. And that would look like talking about the economy and the issues that voters here in Georgia care about. There is the possibility, of course, that he talks about the 2020 election, given that primetime address and the new accusations the president made about voter fraud in U.S. elections, Connell. So a lot could be on tap here. We'll see what the president has to say. Likely he takes the stage here in a couple of minutes.
Well, Libby Dean's live in Marietta.
Independent Americans, if you watch or listen to the show, you know the 2026 primaries are taking shape. You also know you can trade on the biggest political races on Kalshi. With Kalshi, you can trade on major primaries, election outcomes, and the biggest political storylines as they happen. And it's primary season, going into the biggest midterms ever. So you can trade on, for example, the Maine Senate election. Graham Plattner is out now. Troy Jackson will be up against Susan Collins. Right now, Susan Collins is trading at 36%. Which means a $100 trade would pay out $265.86 if she wins that election, which is right now where I'm putting my money. The big one, who will be the presidential nominees? On the Democratic side, Gavin Newsom trading at 19%, meaning a $100 wager will earn you out $473.45 if you want to get on the Gavin Newsom bandwagon, or AOC, Rahm Emanuel, Buttigieg, Andy Beshear, Mark Kelly. Who do you think it's going to be? They're all up there. And on the Republican side, J.D. Vance trading at 40%, meaning a $100 wager will earn you out $239.90 if J.D. Vance becomes the nominee. Donald Trump Jr. is up there. Donald Trump himself is up there. Tucker Carlson, Ivanka Trump trading at 1.3%. They're all there. And finally, a fun one. Will the U.S. confirm that aliens exist? Because this year, you never know. If you say it's before 2027, there is a 7.2% chance. If you say before 2029, that is trading at 24%, meaning you will earn on a $100 wager $388.29. So you have more money in your pocket when the aliens get here. Look, on Kalshi, you can trade against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. As the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your positions. And for a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use the code INDEPENDENT. That's independent like independent Americans to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, Kalshi, trade on anything. 18 and older, restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Even contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and availability in the markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. Independent Americans, there is a lot going on, and you can trade on all of it on Kalshi.
Paul Rieckhoff here with me in New York. Libby brings up a couple of issues, some of which we've already talked about when you mentioned transparency as a concern, but also the threats the president has been very public about today. And he said this before, but now very specific. Like, I'm going after basically civilian infrastructure if you keep hitting ships, Iran, in the Strait of Hormuz.
I think it's important to remember that's expensive. Yesterday's request from Hegseth included roughly $21 billion for weapons and munitions. That's a lot of money. And that's $21 billion that could go back into roads and bridges and all kinds of other stuff in Georgia and around the country. And I think Americans are keeping track. I think they understand how expensive this war is. They understand it's a defense budget request for $1.3 trillion. And Trump can't have it both ways. He can't bring down prices in the U.S. and continue to have the Iran war. So he's going to have to make a choice here. And if he doesn't, this is what we're going to have. More political pain, more sinking poll numbers, and more expense for the U.S. and for our allies and the global economy, because the Strait of Hormuz is still not secure.
Right.
Until it is, we're going to have this economic disruption that's going to hit our kitchen tables and our refrigerators every day.
But what about just the idea of hitting, so for example, bridges in Iran? I've heard some former military officials come on and say, all right, there could be a legitimate military reason to do that. I've heard others say that no, that's not the case.
I mean, it could be either way. I can't talk about, unless I have specific targets, but I think the really bigger point here is it's tit for tat. They hit us, we hit them. When does it end? What should we prepare for? Is this going to take 5 years, 10 years, 5 months? He said it was going to be over. And then when he said we had a ceasefire and now it's re-engaged again and he's talking about hitting them some more. So I think the underlying point is the country does not want this war. If he continues to go forward, he's going to pay a very high political price. And so will his party, especially with independents who continue to sour on him. They're sour on the Democrats too, but the Democrats aren't continuing this war. He is.
Stand by for one more minute, Paul, as we wait for the president to take the stage. I want to go to our senior congressional correspondent, Joe Khalil. And Joe, Paul and I were just speaking about some of the funding debates that took place in that hearing yesterday that we covered live in the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. But I know on the House side, we have some votes that we're looking forward to that are supposed to be starting shortly. Bring us up to speed.
Yeah, we got 3 big votes today. And actually, Connell, the House is trying to pack all this in before they leave for the recess. Any one of these passing would be a big day for the House by itself. The fact that you got all 3, it's a really big deal. It's an ambitious agenda. It's the NDAA, which is obviously authorizing all the $1.5 trillion for the Pentagon. And then there's this budget resolution, that, reconciliation process. It's $95 billion. Most of that would go to the Pentagon as well. $73 billion of it. And again, this is a part of the Pentagon asking for this extra money, this supplemental. So this would be the House's version of doing that, trying to move it forward. We did talk to lawmakers. If we have the sound bites, we'll cue them up here. A lot of Republicans are saying this is absolutely necessary funding. I talked to Derek Schmidt, congressman from Kansas, and I basically said, defend your vote. Make the argument to your constituents as to why, even as the polls show, this war has become a bit more unpopular. This is a necessary and justified vote to grant all this extra money to the Pentagon right now. This is what he told me.
When America is strong, you don't have to use the tools as often when you're strong and folks know what the consequence of having them and using them is. So we've been in the posture of trying to get our defenses back to where they need to be. That is certainly now exacerbated by the realities in Iran, where we've expended a large portion of munitions. We've identified some areas we need to be a bit more targeted, a bit stronger, and that's what this bill's aimed at doing.
So, Connell, on the other side of that debate, talked to Congressman Greg Landsman, a Democrat from Ohio. This is certainly nobody's progressive here. He's a pretty moderate voice in the Democratic conference. And this is the counter to voting for the bill. He's among many Democrats voting against it.
They expect a blank check from Congress, which they may get from Republicans, and they give us nothing. There's no briefings, which is a terrible thing for America. There's no insight. No one knows what the strategy is. Nobody. I'm not sure that the president has a sense of what the strategy is. And they are blowing through, tax dollars at an insane rate.
So putting the war itself aside for a second, there is an argument about spending $95 billion. Originally, there were Republicans against it because it was not paid for. Usually Republicans, those fiscal hawks, like to have cuts in addition to the spending, so it balances out. That does not exist here in this bill, yet still, it seems like most Republicans are poised to vote for it. Now, we're obviously going to watch this vote in the next hour and see how it plays out, but it is interesting that so many Republicans have lined up behind this bill. Again, we'll see what happens with it today and whether it faces any complications in the Senate, which at this point we think is actually likely, Connell.
Right, especially, thank you, Joe, especially, Paul, when you try to attach versions or parts of the SAVE Act, the president's voting bill, to anything. Once it gets over to the Senate, they just don't have the votes there, I don't think.
2026 is kind of like upside down world. Republicans used to be about fiscal conservatism and the debt, right?
Right.
They're not talking about that. I mean, Democrats are talking about, curbing spending. And I think, frankly, that's the populist position right now. Americans don't want to see billions of dollars go overseas, whether it's for Israel or if it's a war in Iran. They want it back home. They want lower taxes. They want lower prices. And I think whichever party can land on that is going to do better in November. And I think you're going to see both of them start to come together. Republicans are going to have to choose. Are you all in on this war in Iran or not? And if you are, I think you're going to suffer at the polls.
All right. As always, we appreciate it, Paul. We'll see you next week, okay?
Yes, sir.
Paul Rieckhoff, Independent Americans Podcast.
He tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wake, it's time to grow. And it's not cool to believe in school, but if I can say one thing, I've seen the children of the revolution and the good trouble they can bring. He says the red and blue are dead and independent is an attitude. An island in the sea of rhetoric and I could go. He tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wait, it's time to grow.
Powered by Righteous Media.